Hello, I'm Stephen Leake. I'm an elder at First Presbyterian Church in Mesquite, Texas, and I'm also the teacher of the Discipleship Sunday School class there. Today we continue with our study of the Gospel of John. And last week we started the passage in chapter 13, the first 17 verses, in which the story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet is told. And I'd like to remind you that this made a vivid impression on John because the story of the Last Supper is not in the Gospel of John, but what he remembered from that night when they all had supper together was that Jesus washed their feet. So it's a very poignant, emotional story, and it was very important to our gospel writer. I'd like to remind you that we're using the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible for our scripture readings, and our curriculum is based upon the Daily Bible Study Series by Professor William Barclay. So let's get started. I'm going to reread last week's scripture, John 13, verses 1 through 17. And then we'll keep discussing what happened. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Don't you just love that verse? Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them till the end. What a magnificent piece of prose that is. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you will have no share with me." Simon Peter said, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash, except for the feet, and is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason, he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you. Very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." We have already seen that in this Gospel of John, we always have to be looking for two meanings. We look first for the meaning which lies on the surface, and then we have to look for the meaning which lies beneath the surface. In this story, there is undoubtedly a second meaning. On the surface, it's a dramatic and unforgettable lesson in humility. But there is more to it than that. There is one very difficult passage. At first, Peter refuses to let Jesus wash his feet. Jesus tells him that unless he accepts this washing, he will have no part with him. Then Peter begs that not only his feet, but his hands and his head should also be washed. But Jesus tells him that it's enough that his feet should be washed. The difficult sentence, and the one with an inner meaning, is, he who has been bathed has need only to have his feet washed. Beyond doubt, there's a reference to Christian baptism here. Unless you are washed, you can have no part in me, as a way of saying, unless you are baptized, you don't have a part in the church. The point is this: it was the custom that before people went to a feast, they bathed themselves. When they came to the house of their host, they did not need to be bathed again. All they needed was to have their feet washed. The washing of the feet was the ceremony which preceded entry into the house where they were guests. Jesus says to Peter, it's not the bathing of your body that you require. That you can do for yourself. What you need is the washing which marks entry into the household of the faith. This explains something else. Peter at first is going to refuse to allow Jesus to wash his feet. Jesus said that if he does, he will have no part in him. It is as if Jesus said, Peter, are you going to be too proud to let me do this for you? If you are, you will lose everything. In the early church, and still today, the way to membership, is the way of baptism. That is not to say that people cannot be saved unless they are baptized. But it does mean that if they are able to be baptized and are too proud, their pride shuts them out from the family of faith. Things are different now. In the early days, it was grown men and women who came to be baptized because they were coming from paganism into the faith. Now, in many of our churches, we bring children for baptism too. But in this passage, Jesus was drawing a picture of the washing, which is the entry to the church, and was telling people that they must not be too proud to submit to it. Our next passage is John 13, verses 18 through 20. I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but it is to fulfill the scripture. The one who ate my bread lifted his heel against me. I tell you this now before it occurs, so that when it does occur, you may believe that I am he. Very truly I tell you, whoever receives one whom I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. There are three things stressed in this passage. First, the sheer cruelty of Judas' disloyalty is vividly pictured in a way which would be especially poignant to those familiar with Middle Eastern customs. Jesus used a quotation here from Psalm 41, verse 9. In full, the quotation runs, "Even my bosom friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me." In the Middle East, to eat bread with someone was a sign of friendship and an act of loyalty. For those who had eaten bread at someone's table, to turn against the person to whom by that very act they had pledged their friendship was a bitter thing. This disloyalty for the psalmist is the bitter of hurts. Second, this passage also stresses the fact that all this tragedy is somehow within the purpose of God, and that it is fully and unquestioningly accepted by Jesus. There was never any doubt that the redemption of mankind would break God's heart. Jesus knew what was happening. He knew the cost, and he was willing to pay it. He was not going to be killed. He was choosing to die. Third, this passage stresses the bitterness of disloyalty, and it also stresses the glory of fidelity. Someday, these same disciples would take the message of Jesus out to the world. When they did, they would be nothing less than the ambassadors of God on earth. Well, our secular ambassadors do not go out as private individuals. They go out with the honor and support of their country. To listen to them is to listen to their country. To honor them is to honor their country. To welcome them is to welcome their ruler. The great honor and the great responsibility of being a Christian is that we stand in the world for Jesus Christ. We speak for him. We act for him. His honor and God's honor is in our hands. Thanks for joining me today. God bless each and every one of you.